PvE. Whether it's 5-man dungeons, raiding, or solo content, PvE has been the main focus of World of Warcraft since the game's launch back in 2004. Although PvP is a popular part of the game as well, for the majority, people play WoW for the awesome and engaging PvE content. But what are the best DPS specs? In this video, I'll be going over my top 10 DPS specs for PvE. I haven't taken boss mechanics into account, only pure single target damage output. Number 10. The Enhancement Shaman. The Enhancement Shaman is a very fun and unique melee DPS spec. Dual wielding 2 hammers, axes or fist weapons, this spec focuses on combining their weapons and the elements for damage. This spec brings quite a nice bit of utility to a raid as well, with the totems that can heal, break fears, roots, slow and even intervene spells. Enhancement Shamans are also great at solo content due to their good single target and AoE damage, amazing healing capabilities and survivability. As someone who isn't much of a hardcore raider anymore, but instead does a lot of solo content and PvP, this spec really appeals to me. Although the enhancement is a melee spec, it does have access to some ranged abilities, and when ascended, the Shaman's Storm Strike and melee auto attacks also become ranged, which is really cool. Number 9. The Fire Mage. The Fire Mage is a ranged wizard class with a very interesting mechanic. Wielding fire magic, this mage spec focuses on good sustained damage, big crits and fantastic ranged mobility. However, the Fire Mage isn't for everyone, due to their very unique mechanics. Dealing damage as a Fire Mage relies on doing crits to activate procs for huge instant pyroblasts, which in my opinion is one of the coolest abilities in the game, as well as managing ignites and combustions. The spec also has some great utility with its crowd control abilities. Polymorph is one of the best crowd controls in the game. A lot of the mage's abilities passively snare enemies, which is great for solo content, as you can kill your targets whilst they slowly waddle towards you, and then when they've finally gotten close, you can cast Scorch and run back to range. Number 8. The Destruction Warlock. The Destro Lock is another ranged wizard class. Using fire and fell magic, this spec has great single target, multiple target and burst damage. The main mechanic for the Destro Lock is using Immolate, Conflagrate, and Incinerate to build a resource called Burning Embers, which allow them to use their big damage Chaos Bolts and their Shadow Burn Execute. The Destro Lock brings great crowd control to their team. They can use spammable fears, sleeps, incapacitates, and an AoE stun. On top of the CC, the Lock can bring a lot of utility to a raid with their variety of demonic minions. This utility and various crowd controls also make the Destro Lock a good spec for solo content. Number 7. The Retribution Paladin. The Ret Paladin is a hybrid melee DPS spec using a 2-handed weapon and holy magic. This spec focuses on building up a resource called Holy Power to use their main abilities, Final Verdict and Divine Storm, and managing their seals, which are essentially self-buffs. The Ret Paladin is a spec that relies on their huge burst damage, but has good sustain and AoE as well. Rets have quite a unique playstyle. Although they are mainly a DPS spec, a lot of their abilities give the Ret an almost support class feel, with their good off heals and their hand abilities that transfers damage from a friendly target to them, removes threat, gives freedoms, and making a friendly target immune to melee damage, the Ret brings a lot of utility to any group. Number 6. The Fury Warrior. The Fury Warrior is a melee DPS spec that wields 2 2-handed weapons and is the epitome of in-your-face damage dealer, as well as being a staple class of every fantasy role-playing game. And not to mention, what's cooler than smashing your enemy to pieces with 2 massive weapons. Although the Fury Warrior is the definition of badass, the spec's mechanics is an either you love or hate kind of situation, as the spec relies on managing rage, becoming enraged, and waiting for procs. The Fury Warrior brings great single target and AoE damage, making it a very versatile spec in regards to different boss mechanics. With abilities like Intervene, Charge, and Heroic Leap, the Fury Warrior has a nice amount of mobility. Not to mention, these abilities look awesome. Back in vanilla, I played a warrior solely for charge, and over 10 years later, it's still one of my favourite abilities in the game. This spec also has access to some nice CC. They have an AoE fear, and they can choose between either a single target or an AoE stun. I don't tend to play my warrior that much anymore, but if you're looking for a class to play, then take a leaf out of Ragtag's book and play a warrior. Number 5. The Affliction Warlock. The Affliction Warlock is a ranged spellcaster that has quite an interesting playstyle. The spec relies on using damage over time abilities to drain the target's health. The Affliction Lock has great single target and multiple target damage by applying their dots to multiple targets and seeing everything wither away around them. Just like the other lock specs, the Affli Lock relies on their own unique resource system in the form of soul shards, which are generated by the corruption ability. Soul shards are used for Haunt, which does a nice amount of damage, as well as increasing their dot damage, and Soulburn, an ability that empowers various spells. Although it isn't as bursty as its Destro and Demo counterparts, the Affliction Lock is my personal favourite spec due to the mechanic of tracking debuffs. Just like the Destro I mentioned earlier, the Affliction Lock brings a lot of utility to the group in the form of multiple CCs and their array of demon minions. Number 4. The Marksmanship Hunter. The Marksman Hunter is a ranged physical damage dealer, wielding either a bow, a gun, or a crossbow. Out of the 3 hunter specs, the Marksman is the more stereotypical ranger, with survival focusing more on dots and the Beastmaster relying on pets. True to real life rangers, this spec has a mechanic where it deals more damage when stationary with their sniper training mastery. Although the Marksmanship Hunter doesn't excel at AoE damage like the other hunter specs, it does have good single target damage, but on fights that require a lot of movement, managing the sniper training buff can take a bit of practice to not lose damage. The Marksman Hunter brings a nice amount of utility to a group, as they can provide any buff. They have great crowd control with their Freezing Trap, Wyvern Sting, and their AoE stun, as well as an AoE slow. Number 3. The Frost Mage. The Frost Mage is a ranged spellcaster, and is generally most people's favourite mage spec. Unlike Fire and Arcane, the Frost Mage has a pet. The spec has good sustain, great AoE, and fantastic burst damage. Not only does the Frost Mage have nice mobility, high damage, and is a lot of fun, but the spells look awesome and you feel like a wizard when playing one. Launching huge balls of spinning ice, summoning frost comets from the sky, and having large icicles form over your head that shoot at high speeds to your target is pretty sweet. Frost Mages are one of the best classes for solo content as well as raids and dungeons due to their AoE burst damage, and most of their abilities Snare, which allows them to kite easily, and their Polymorph and Deep Freeze CCs. Number 2. The Subtlety Rogue. The Subtlety Rogue is a melee DPS spec that uses 2 daggers. This spec is considered a ninja-like spec, and it uses stealth and abilities like ambush and backstab to do damage. Although the Sub-Rogue excels at single target damage, its AoE damage is strong as well. Unlike the other specs in this top 10 video, the Sub-Rogue uses a mechanic called combo points. They use abilities to build up these points to do big finishing moves like Eviscerate. The spec has a wide array of defensives. Cloak of Shadows to negate magic damage, Evasion increases their dodge chance by 100%, their Combat Readiness talent is a defensive that mitigates damage, increasing with every weapon attack they receive, as well as a spammable wall called Feint. On top of this, the Rogue has amazing mobility due to burst of speed and sprint. Sub-Rogues are great in a group due to the utility they bring. They have lots of various crowd control abilities, and their passive abilities like Prey on the Weak increase all damage the target takes when under the effect of Kidney Shot, Gouge, Cheap Shot, Sap and Blind. Number 1. The Arcane Mage. The Arcane Mage, like the Frost and Fire Mages, is a ranged wizard spec, and is the highest single target damage dealer in the game. The spec works by building up arcane charges. The more arcane charges the mage stacks, the more damage their abilities do, which in my opinion is quite a fun mechanic. This spec is generally considered the hardest to master out of the 3 mage specs, more so than Frost at least, as it requires tracking and mana management. Despite it being the highest current single target damage spec, the Arcane Mage is also very powerful when it comes to multiple target damage as well. If you look at the raid logs, you see Arcane Mages rocking it, and watching enemies being thrown up in the air by Supernova is easily one of the coolest spell effects in the game. Just like the other 2 mage specs, the Arcane Mage brings some great crowd control to the group. Out of the 3 mage specs, this is easily my favourite because of the class mechanics. So that's it for my top 10 DPS specs in World of Warcraft. Let me know in the comment section below what your top 10 DPS specs are, and also let me know what you want my next top 10 to be about. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Before I end the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my little brother who has just started making YouTube videos, so please go over to his channel and give him some love. I'll put his channel link in the description below. I have been BananaRaccoon, and thank you for watching.